All right, my Rangers. This is day 4 of homeschool. Hopefully you guys are checking this out. I'm going to upload your test to Google Classroom, the one we were preparing for last week when school was closed. So during office hours, please look for that. And I will send you the code for Google Classroom. Please keep an eye on that. I'm also going to upload this PowerPoint. I know that this is a little bit more detailed than the note packet I gave you to kind of follow along with, but that's okay. These are some good information, and we're going to do a compare and a contrast here between Louis, between Peter, and the Stuart dynasties while you are at home. So, all right, where we are now when we stopped yesterday on Wednesday is King James I of Scotland is going to become King James I of England. And he gets there thinking, oh man, I'm out of Scotland. I'm going to be in London. This is going to be great. It's going to be super awesome. Totally freaked me out. I mean, right on. Woo, we are number one. And then he gets there and he finds out that England was deep in debt and the nation was very deeply religiously divided. Some people wanted to remain Catholic. Many people enjoyed being Anglicans. And then if you went to an Anglican church service and a Catholic church service, it'd be very difficult to tell the difference. And then there's a smaller group known as the Puritans, and they just want to trash and overhaul the system and get rid of any traces of Catholicism. So James comes in and he says, hey, I'm ready to follow English law and the Magna Carta and the way you guys do things. I'm down here. But as I understand it, Parliament, the English Parliament, only meets when the king requests them. So if I don't have to call you guys, I'm just not going to do it. And the nobles don't like this, all right? It causes tension. Why is he not bringing us to London to discuss things? And one of the things James does is he's trying to find a way to save money. And England was fighting two very expensive wars, one with Spain and one with France. So he takes his son, Charles I, down to Spain. He says, hey, King of Spain, there, Habsburg, how about my son marry your daughter, and this will secure peace between our nations? And the Spanish princess comes out and says, what? Oh my God, donde está el baño, por favor? I've got to throw up. Look at your son. He's hideously ugly. I'm not marrying him. And so, I mean, this is, a little bit of fun for the story. And so she says no. All right. So Charles is like, okay. Or James rather. On the way back to England, King James stops in France, and he sees the King of France. He's like, hey there, Spitspottle boy, I know we're going to war, we've been fighting for a long time. How about to secure an alliance, my son Charles marry the French princess? And the king says, oh, let me see your son. He's like, oh my God, zut de la, he is ugly. He cannot marry my daughter. She is beautiful French princess. So no. And then Spain hears that the king tried to marry Charles to the Spanish princess. And they're like, hey, S.A., what are you doing, bro? You offered your son's hand in marriage to my daughter. And James is like, well, spitspot cheerio. Yes, I did. And you said no. So what the fish and chips is your problem? Well, you can't do that. You can't offer her to France. France, what disease? You offer her to Spain instead of us. We are number 2. And it only makes the situation worse. And then James gets home. And Parliament says, hey, what were you doing? Why are you trying to form an alliance with those Catholic countries? Like, it wasn't an alliance, you guys. We're broke. I'm trying to save us money. Don't you buffoons see that? Ah! And so when that doesn't work, he decides to develop new sources of money, of revenue. And what he wants to do is any ship that comes ashore in England or in a British colony has to pay a tax. Not very much. Let's call it a nickel, all right? But 5 cents from many sources turns into a whole lot of money. Well, Parliament is furious. They don't like this because he didn't bother to ask them. And he's like, oh my God, don't you see that we need this money? And then these Puritans come in, King, you are not doing anything to end all Catholic practices. And he's like, oh my God, people, we have so much bigger problems. Number one, we're broke. Number two, we're at war with 2 countries. I'll get to it, but just not right now. And so they get angry. James is not meeting what they see as the first priority. And so James is going to cause trouble for himself and his son, Charles I, and his 2 grandsons, all right? Charles I is going to have 2 sons, clever, Charles II and James II. So we're talking about a grandpa, his son, and 2 grandsons. And absolutism in England is not going to work very well. So, Charles I, when his dad dies, tries to pick up where his father had stopped. And Charles I begins to believe in this thing known as divine right. All right? Believed in the policy of divine right, and he begins to behave like an absolute monarch. I would not be king if the king did not want me to be, or if God did not want me to be king. He also has a pretty good, friend who's telling him the same thing. So Charles I begins to behave like he is in charge and doesn't need anybody else. And so when people begin to speak out, he throws them in prison. And he will charge them money to be released, or he will tax their territories. And he begins to accumulate this money to further what he wants to do. A problem is he has a spending problem. He's always spending more than he is taking in. So when he runs out of money, he's forced to call Parliament. This is known as the short Parliament. If we were in school, I'd tell you a real funny story and do an impersonation of this, but it's kind of hard to do on the video camera. And when the members of Parliament show up, they present him with a list of grievances known as the Petition of Right. And they say, look, man, you've got to stop what you're doing. There will be no new taxes or new imprisonments without Parliament's consent. You just can't throw people in prison and raise taxes. And the king is like, no, what are you talking about? I'm the king. I don't work for you. You work for me. But in the end, he's forced to sign the document to get his money, even though he has no intention of keeping it. And then for the next 11 years, he decides that he's going to go on a strict budget. And he hires an advisor, a guy named Thomas Wentworth. We have a local connection to him here in Chapel Hill. Many years ago, I taught a young student, Sam, and he's related to the Wentworth family. And the jeweler in town, Wentworth and Sloan, are direct descendants of this guy. And Wentworth is a budgeting financial genius. And he says, Your Highness, I'm going to give you, in effect, an allowance. If you stick to it, strict fiscal policy, you can become an absolute monarch. But you got to follow my plan and don't spend more than your allowance. And for the next 11 years, things are going good. But Charles just can't help himself. And he gets into a war in his old homeland of Scotland over, religious unification. And the king, when his troops get defeated, needs more money to send in new ones. And he's forced to call Parliament. And they were mad. They were angry. They hadn't been to London in over a decade. So they tell him, look, man, you are not going to get the money until you listen to our demands. And one of the things you cannot do is dismiss us without our consent. And the king is like, man, whatever. And then he loses another battle to the Scots. And now he has to listen to their demands. And they say, you are not going to get rid of us. They even capture some of his advisors and execute them. And the king says, that's enough. I am king. And he begins to invade. And Charles led his troops into Parliament, starting what will be known as the English Civil War. The ringleaders get out just in time. But what happens next is the English Civil War, which is going to last from 1642 to 1649. And the king is supposed to win quickly. He's a noble. The old nobles' military men are on his side, and they're known as the Cavaliers, like the Cleveland Cavaliers. This should be an easy, quick victory. But they fight against a group of the common people known as Roundheads, because they literally had the worst haircut of all time, where you literally place a bowl on your head and you trim around it. So they were known as the Roundheads. So over here you have the Cavaliers with their long hair and their fancy little military costumes. Then you got the plain average Joe and his bowl haircut. The guy on the right is a guy by the name of Oliver Cromwell. Well, realistically, on paper, this thing should be over. The Roundheads were just plain average Joe countrymen, and they should have been no match for the Cavaliers. Well, the Roundheads pick a leader. The guy I just showed you, this guy here on the right, known as Oliver Cromwell. And he turns out to be not only very aggressive and determined, but not only an organizational genius and tactician, but a military one as well. And the underdog Roundheads win. And Charles I will become the first and the only English king, and he is executed in 1649. Now, as the story goes, what I heard in London, as when he's brought up, he talks to the people, hey man, I hold no offense. I was just trying to do what I thought was right. It's all good. And he turned to the executioner and said, look, let me say some prayers and I'll give you a nod. And if you were a common person or a criminal, they would bring in an axeman who would swing. And if they didn't get a good chop, with all the muscles and the sinew at the back of the neck, it may take a swing or two to lop off your head. Think of Nearly Headless Nick and Harry Potter. But if you were wealthy, they would bring home a specialist from France with a very sharp, giant blade that would sever your head in one. Charles kneels down, says his prayers, nods to the executioner, thunk, thunk. King Charles is dead. And with that, they declare the English king done. The English monarchy is dissolved. It is no more. Now, this terrifies all other royals in Europe, because if they can do that to the English king, what can happen to us? And England is thus declared a commonwealth, and its prime minister, its leader, is Oliver Cromwell. And the problem was, Cromwell was smart, but he's really boring. It's like you guys sitting in my class going, oh my God, what are we doing? All right. Cromwell was a Puritan, and he wanted to live by strict rules, almost like, Amish. You could only wear like brown, navy blue, or black documents. Theaters were closed. Dancing halls were closed. The British love their pubs and taverns. They were closed. Music and dancing were heavily censored. It was just straight boring. You couldn't do anything. And then Cromwell says, there is going to be freedom of worship. You can be whatever religion you want as long as it's a Protestant one. That means no Catholics could worship. And Cromwell's reign is going to have many, many problems. Some are starting to say, hey, the monarchy sucked. But God, Cromwell is just boring. Can we have a little bit of fun? Can we have a pint and cheer for a soccer game or something? So in 1658, when Cromwell dies, Parliament brings back King Charles II, the beheaded king's son, who was hanging out over in France. And Charles II he's just a guy. He was a charmer, right? He had great political skills. He was one of those guys that could put on Carhartts and work boots and go down to local pub and talk like power tools and football with the guys. Or he could put on a tuxedo and a black tie and go deliver a keynote speech at a champagne and caviar dinner. He was fun, he was handsome, he was a good speaker. And he comes in and says, oh yeah, you want me to rule by Parliament's laws? I mean, I'm good with that. Sounds great. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all that boring crap that Cromwell liked. We're going to have pubs and taverns and dancing and music and theaters, and let's go. And Charles II claims that he wants to unite people in England under this crazy idea called religious tolerance. If you want to be Protestant, be Protestant. You want to be a hardcore Puritan, be a Puritan. But if you want to be Catholic, that's fine too. And his people are like, what the bangers and mash did you just say? And he said, yeah, it's okay to be Catholic. And they're like, no. You can't be a patriot and a Catholic at the same time. And what people find out is that one of Charles II's good buddies was none other than the King Louis XIV of France. So wait a minute, maybe he is a Catholic trying to return Catholic rule to England. But being the savvy politician, Charles II avoids confrontations with Parliament. He tries, under the guise of religious tolerance, to become absolute, but he's trying to be sly and subtle about it, like Louis XIV. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. And then disaster happens to England when King Charles II dies and his brother James takes over in 1685. James was the spare. He never thought that he was going to be named king, all right? His dad had 2 sons. His job was to be like a party boy, kind of like old Prince Harry. And now he's the king, and he's like, what? I'm the king? Ha ha! Watch this, everybody who didn't pay me any attention when I was young. Here we go. He's blatantly pro-Catholic, doesn't care about hiding it. And his policies are going to make most people in England angry. So he abolishes laws without consulting Parliament. Going to get rid of that one. If you disagree with him, he has you kicked out of Parliament and replaced with one of his buddies. These are things that you just can't do. Then he appoints known powerful Catholics to these governmental positions. And they're like, you can't do that. And he's like, yeah, I can. And then he goes too far. He tells all the Anglican priests and bishops that they need to announce to their congregations that anybody who wants to be a Catholic can. And some churches are going to be reopened as Catholic churches or multi-use churches. 7 Anglican bishops don't do this. And they always say protocol going to a dinner party is not discussing religion or politics. You can do a lot of stuff, but you don't mess with somebody's religion. It's freedom of choice for a reason. But when he throws these bishops in jail, it's too far. And people get angry. People realized he was trying to subjugate all institutions, to make them buckle to his power. And so this attack on the church is just too daggone much. So they decide to have a revolution. It's called the Glorious Revolution. Well, I don't think it was either glorious or a revolution. It's what they call it. So I don't know if I should keep going with this. It's been about 20 minutes. I think I will finish it up tomorrow and submit an assignment on the Google Classroom for you guys to do. I'm also going to upload this Parliament so to kind of supplement that note packet I gave you. And our next unit will be a lot more fun. It will be the Enlightenment and the Revolution. So hope to see you guys soon. Hope you're all safe. Remember, sign up for Google Classroom, please.